All right, so we have a very special guest for everyone today on the lineup for our final episode of 2023. He is the youngest brother in one of the more revered families in surfing. He and his family have traveled all over the world chasing waves and adventure. He was a standout amateur and junior surfer. He was actually one of the lead prospects coming out of the mainland US in the 1990s, and he made good on that potential with a number of competitive results, including a win at the OP Pro Junior in 1996, a runner-up finish to Sonny Garcia at the US Open in 2000, winning the Faith Riding Pro QS event at Sunset Beach in 2003, and being selected by his peers to Surfer Magazine's poll as one of the 10 best surfers in the world. That said, competition surfing didn't hold the same allure for him as surf exploration did, and he parlayed his talent and his passion into a number of free surfing projects, including Thicker Than Water, Step Into Liquid, One California Day, The Present, A Broke Down Melody, Sprout, and many others, collaborating with the likes of Taylor Steele and Thomas Campbell in the process. He's been an ambassador for brands like Billabong, Hurley, Patagonia, YETI, and many others. And he now runs a successful educational farm with his family in Ventura, in between continued inspiring performances in the water when you are lucky enough to catch him doing so. We have Dan Malloy on the podcast. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Dave. I really appreciate it.
So we were joking about it when we were trying to set up, and I'm here in Oxnard. I've been here for 13 years. You're up the road. We're kind of neighbors. But where are you coming to from today? Where are we talking from today for you?
I live in my hometown, which is Ojai, California. It's just up the Ventura River Valley from basically C Street. You just follow that river up the hill, and I live in a little side part of Ojai called Miners Oaks.
Very cool. And what is your day-to-day like up there in 2003? Is it pretty consistent? Do you have a routine, or is it every day's different?
I mean, these days with the kiddo, we have a 4-year-old. It's a little bit more routine, because you're running around with him, trying not to get kicked in the nuts all day, and just basically running him to school, working on little projects here at our place. Try to jam down to the beach when I can, sneak in a little run or whatever it might be. But it's mellowed out a lot since in my 20s and 30s, I was on the road all the time and never had a schedule. And these days, I'm home most of the time and enjoying it. I do like being home these days a lot.
I'm always curious with people, because I traveled a lot for the tour as well. I still do a little bit, but people that was their life, like being a road warrior for, in some cases, like decades, and then transitioning to a more kind of static home life in a singular place. Was that challenging for you, or were you, by the time you were ready to do it, were you like, I'm good, I need a break from the road, and I want to kind of put down roots?
It's a little of both. Yeah, it's a little of both for me. I for sure had never knew what being homesick was like. I didn't even understand what that meant for years. We'd be on the Australia leg of the tour, and I think it ended in West Oz, and all my friends would be going home, and I'd be like, we'd have 3 or 4 weeks till the next contest. And I'd be like, there's no way I'm going home. Why would I ever go home? And so until I think I was about 33 or something like that, I never even thought about it. I never imagined I'd move back to my hometown. I just didn't think. I was just like, we were scoring perfect waves on the road, doing something new every single day, and never thought about it. And then it was like a light switch all of a sudden, and totally unexpected. I had this radical urge to spend more time at home. And that's when I would be home in Ventura, because I lived in Hawaii too. And when I would come visit family and friends in Ventura, I'd come back up to my hometown, and I was like, wow, this is weird. Totally unexpected too. But this feels more like home than anywhere that I've been, Right. And so it was unexpected for sure to have that feeling of wanting to put my feet on the ground, get my feet on the ground. But then, I can't deny that hitting the road isn't a blast, getting on the road, still feels amazing. I think there's just a balance to it now. Like I don't want to be on the road all year anymore, but to take a little break and get perspective on what you're doing at home is really important. Cause like after whatever 5 or 6 months or 8 months at home, you kind of just start to lose perspective in the day to day. So yeah, it was a little bit of a mix of both. Yeah.
It makes sense. And it's interesting to hear you talk about when you were touring and how, you and your brothers were like, well, we're in Western Australia. I'm not running home for 4 weeks. Like, why would I do that? And it makes me think of a few years ago, we were in Jeffreys Bay and the event finished and the waves are supposed to be good for weeks on end. And Kelly was just planning on staying. And Stephen Bell, his sort of longtime confidant, I remember he was talking to me about it, and he's like, all these kids that are coming up, like they get in, a day before the event starts, and the second they're done, they're like on the flight out that night. They're like, why do you think Kelly's so good? Like he never really had a home, and his home was on the road. And if he wanted to stay in Jeffreys Bay for 2 months, he would and just score and get that good. And that always struck me as kind of a recent phenomenon, but it sounds like that was also the case when you were touring too. There was a good chunk of people that were like, get me home. I'm not here to hang out.
Oh yeah. Especially in Hawaii. Mm. That was the really interesting one to me because, my dad lived in Maui for a while when we were kids. Sorry, not when we were kids, before we were born. And so we just always, like, Hawaii was just just really ingrained in our imaginations. And the second that we had the opportunity, my brothers and I, to move to Hawaii, we did. And we loved every second of it. We'd get there, a month before the contest started, we didn't even it wasn't based off of when the contest happened or when the scene, we lived there. And so it was really clear during that period of time, who loved being there and who felt like they had to be there, and, right. And that was amazing because it was it was hard to believe for me because Oahu is Mecca, that was the place. There was just nowhere I would have rather been those years than just having your finger on the pulse, like every day waking up and looking at pipeline and sunset and, rocky rights and all that stuff. But it's funny you brought that up though about Kelly. My brother Chris and I were just talking about it the other day, and I forget why it came up, but he literally would just win an event. I feel like Kelly and Ross Williams and Shane Dorian were all like this. They would just do something crazy, or Kelly would just win an event. And while the awards are going on, he's like, holy shit, little sandbar's going off right now. Right. Still thinking about which wave is going off. It didn't matter if somewhere was all time. He wanted to be there. Right. And, he's just the freak of freaks when it comes to that. Just so incredibly tuned in and obsessed, with being on it when it's good.
I wonder, now that you're bringing that up, I wonder if that is more of a generational thing where it's more folks from your generation and probably the ones before looked at professional surfing as a career, mostly as and we all do to a degree, a version of a grift, right? Where you're the most important thing to me is to go surfing. And if doing contests or doing video parts or putting stickers on my board allows me to go surfing more, I'm going to do that. And to your point, they're on stage winning awards and being like, well, look at that wave down the way. That's what their focus is. And then flash forward, a couple of decades, and the surfing industrial complex has grown so much that it is like a career, and you kind of have really elite level surfers achieving things, but they're like, this is a business. I got to go do my thing. It's probably not that polarizing, but I wonder if that's a version of it where it's like, oh no, we were just running away to join the circus. That's what we were trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of, for me in my career or whatever, it kind of depends on when it was, from right. 13 to 14, I surfed for stickers straight up. I was like, that's why I was doing it. But, later on, there was definitely, the best sessions I ever had, there was no contest and nobody filming. And that was totally fine. But, it was also like you were pretty young, and it was fun to have the little chip on your shoulder to try to want to be better than that guy or try to win an event. But I would say that I was really lucky, like incredibly lucky, to grow up with that crew of guys. Like, they were older than me, but they let me tag along. And there was really amazing camaraderie about scoring unbelievable surf with no one around and having secret spots and sessions where you just didn't bring cameras. And that was a really, really fun part of it. And it kept like a little, there was something sacred about what we were doing. It wasn't just, even though we were like, as involved with getting photos and making sure all that stuff happened as anybody ever, there was this sacred part of it too. But, so I think that was, I just feel really lucky. Like, I came up just below, Chris and Keith and Ross and Shane and Kelly. And then they came up below Brock Little and Todd Chesser. And those guys had a really neat way that they pushed each other. And that trickled down to us in a way that I really appreciate over time, because, there was a time to go out and like, get the job done so you could travel and all that stuff. And there was a time to just go surfing with a couple of friends and let all that stuff go. And so I really appreciate, as the years go on, I really appreciate getting to come up under those guys.
Right. I like the way you articulated that too, because I think any surfer out there, whether you're actively seeking it out or you just kind of happen to stumble upon like a really special session where all these conditions come together, and maybe it's just you, or maybe it's just you and your friends, and you share it, and it's like you can't really even articulate the value of it, but that's kind of why, that's what drives you, where you're like, oh my God, like that's worth more than all the money I'll ever make, is getting like a couple hours in those conditions, and it will never happen again. It was like that little special moment. It's really interesting.
Yeah. You're half the time too, you're better off if it doesn't get documented, because it's never quite as good as you think it was.
Right. Yeah. More than half the time for me. I like the way I surf in my head much more than the evidence.
Do you remember the times when you were a kid and you're like, oh my God, I got the best barrel ever. And then you see it on video and you're like, just devastated.
That can't be the wave. Yeah. No, it's going to be something else.
Dad, you missed it.
Right, yeah. Clearly that's not it. That's not going in the highlight reel. I know we're jumping around a little bit, and I definitely want to spend a lot of time on your trajectory, because I think it's so interesting. But, you've worn so many hats in surfing. If you had to describe to our listeners, they're listening in, what your career is in 2023 in any respect, how would you kind of articulate
it? Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I could articulate it exactly. I think I'm at a time in my life where it's really, I'm figuring out what the next phase is, to be honest with you. Right. I jumped on a train when I was like 12 years old. Like, I was already obsessed with surfing when I was a tiny kid, and was just hell bent. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And I spent all my time surfing and thinking about surfing and, trying to be a professional surfer. And I got to do that. And then, because of that, I got to learn about filmmaking. Because of that, I had really lucky timing and amazing support with the Hurley family and Paul Gomez, and those guys really had my back. And then when the transition came and I went to Patagonia, that was an amazing transition where I was still surfing a ton, but I was helping them kind of like understand surfing on a bigger level. And so when I parted ways from Patagonia a couple of years ago, it was like, kind of in a way, I felt like I got to work for the brands that I wanted to work for, like what to me felt like the best brands in the world, and, work in marketing and work with the designers and direct short documentaries and do all of this work. And in a way, when that relationship faded away, it created this gap for the first time since I was like, 13 years old, of being like, okay, well, kind of what's next? And I mean, what I'm doing now, spending most of my time doing here in Ojai, is that my wife and I started an educational farm. We have 4 acres right in the center of this neighborhood that's surrounded by schools. And so we have 4 acres, and we have a small vegetable farm and dairy goats and chickens and a bunch of citrus, and basically open it up as a space where kids can come and learn and be outside. Like, so many kids are just kind of, I feel like, desperate. So many kids are just desperate to be outside and working with their hands, and I don't think that's, enough of an option these days in school. So that's like what we're spending most of our time doing. And just this year, that's become a nonprofit, and it's not, I wouldn't call it like a career, but it's what we're super passionate about and what we're interested in. And right now we're just like concentrating on it 100% and seeing what happens. It's one of those things where it's like, if we, we've been doing this work. My wife's, runs the teaching operation along with our partner, a guy named Daryl Forth, who's helping out. And we have a couple other employees too. And we've been spending all of our time doing that. And it's kind of one of those moments where we're like, hey, well, let's spend 100% of our time creating this educational farm for the community and see if it works. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll see what's next. On the side, I'm still trying to surf as much as I can, been body surfing a ton, and I go spearfishing when I can. That's definitely one of my favorite things to do. But right now it's like, completely different than it's ever been. And most of my time I'm spending here working on that. I definitely have, like, I know I'll work on a few more films in my life, but I'm not like chasing kind of the commercial filmmaking world at the moment. But I do love filmmaking, and I know that I'll work on a couple more films, but I don't know exactly what they will be. I think more kind of along the lines of documentary filmmaking type of work. So we'll see, but yeah, it's not right now it's not, I don't have like this perfect kind of 10-year plan. I'm kind of taking it, day at a time.
Well, it's good to hear too. And I mean, I think also interestingly, obviously you still have, you still get your gills wet, and you got an incredible storyteller and you have all this experience and knowledge. But I think one of the cool things is that even though for you personally, it probably feels like a far cry away from, surfer poles and putting the jersey on and being the star of a lot of these films, you're in a different space in your life. You're doing a different thing, but you've still grown to a place where brands are traveling with you, like even into these other spaces. In a lot of cases, they're in spaces where the brands have a lot of history as well. I think, YETI being one of them, they're supporting this podcast, but it does feel like as we talk to more surfers on this podcast, or just sort of creatives and outdoorsmen, they get to a place in their career where it's like, well, I don't have to go chasing the sticker. I don't have to go do the thing that sponsor wants me to do necessarily. I can partner with brands that are really more aligned with what I want to do. And it feels like that's probably a sweet spot for you and YETI in a way.
Absolutely. I kick myself a little bit because I'm like, I know in a combination for a combination of reasons in my career, I got super spoiled. Like, I worked for the exact brands that I dreamed of working for that made amazing gear, And so, working with brand like Patagonia and with YETI, it's made it a little hard afterwards to be like, oh, I'm going to go throw my whole life in it. I tend to do that when I'm like,
right,
I'm going to work for somebody. I throw everything into it. So some of the other brands after Patagonia was done, I've been like kind of looking around. I'm like, I don't know if I can throw my whole life into that. And YETI's been amazing because I use their gear every day. And they've been super supportive on the creative front, on the filmmaking stuff. I also just love like who, when we're working on a project for YETI, who I get to hang out with. Like, if you are going on a trip and you get to go hang out with Kimmy Werner and Mark Healy, and, they're involved with everyone from, JT Van Zant to Shane Dorian and freaking bull riders and all. Like it's just an amazing group of people. So it's I just feel really lucky to be a part of that crew. And and they just, the gear that they make is, literally like, whether it's, fishing gear, backcountry gear, whatever it is, it's just like so solid. So I feel really lucky to be working with them. Yeah.
We've been pretty pumped to have them as a partner just because the gear is so good, whether it's, like the Go Box or, the Ramblers or whatever. It's been really fantastic. And for you in particular, like even all those brands you listed were very gear centric, whether it was Billabong or Hurley or Patagonia or YETI. And it does sound like for you in particular, like it's one thing to wear the clothes, one thing to put the stickers on, but it does feel like the most potent brands are the ones that are like, here is a hard good, whatever it is, wetsuit, cooler, board short, etc. And this gear is actually going to improve the quality of your life if you use it right. It's going to be durable, it's going to be functional, it's going to be high quality. And I feel like that's always the best way to go about building a brand, even if you move into clothing, because it's like, at some point clothing becomes kind of ubiquitous, but if that's associated with a product that really improves my life, I'm going to probably go buy that t-shirt or whatever.
Yeah. I will say, like, over the years, I feel like growing up in the surf industry, like growing up as a little kid watching the surf movies and looking at the magazines, I feel like, you kind of grow up believing all of the things you're looking at,
Right. Yeah.
The marketing really works when you're a kid, like you're
big time
all in on what you're seeing. And so it was really interesting to be like so heavily immersed in all the media when you're a little kid, and then be like, I want to be, I want to get sponsored by these guys. I want to do this, and then go do that and be a part of it and be in the room when people are making decisions. And then start comparing the gear to other brands, and kind of the veil starts to get lifted a little bit, on the marketing side of things. And you're like, whoa, this is all really similar stuff. Like this is most all of this gear is all made in, one, like, all designed in one very small area in Southern California. Then it's all produced in the same factories overseas, but then it's all marketed as totally different things. And so to be in the middle of it all and see that and be like, whoa, this is totally different than what I imagined it would be. It was, kind of awesome to go into the belly of the beast and learn that. And then to actually identify brands that are making real useful gear. And that's what kind of led, my brothers and I and myself on the journey of working for brands that make amazing things that you actually need, And it's like recently I've just been spending a little time up at True Aim's, the fin company in Goleta. Do you know about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just so fun and so interesting to spend time with Chuck Ames, just like master craftsman, and like he is, direct. He's talking to Greeno still once a week and working on designs for new fins, and they cut them right there in the shop and foil them and do the whole deal. They build the fins from start to finish, most of them anyway. And to be, and this is like directly what we need to do the actual act of surfing,
right. Yeah.
And so that stuff's really interesting to me these days. And I love spending time, with people who, whether it's shapers or, with those guys up there, has been amazing. I was going to bring this fin. They have this new fin, or it's not that new, but it's this new Greeno collaboration trailer fin that they made. It's just so beautiful.
Oh, is that the one you posted on Instagram, right? That would like this
Yeah,
little
I did. I posted that one.
So everyone check out Dan's Instagram to know
Yeah, it's like a
exactly
little
what you're
hatchet
talking
looking
about.
fin.
It's cool. It's so beautiful.
So beautiful. And it's just fun to be around people that are doing like the work that is directly connected to surfing. You know, I love spending time little here and there with Britt Merrick and talking about surfboards. Mostly because like I'm fascinated by like, I don't know, surfboard shaping is really mysterious to me. And talking to someone like Britt, he's such a master. And to see his development has been really, really cool. And so that stuff's really interesting to me these days. And yeah, so the brand side of things, the clothing brand side of things, not as interesting to me as it used to be.
As you said, the veil's been pulled a little too far back. You're like, oh, that's what's behind the curtain.
Yeah,
okay, I get it. I've been there too.
Yeah.
That's a great segue. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. This is The Lineup. I'm Dave Prodan here with Dan Malloy. Dan, we touched on a few components of your family and your upbringing, you know, in Ventura, Santa Barbara County. But for the listeners out there, can you give us more of a sense of like, what was your family like growing up? Like, what did mom and dad do, siblings? And I know you guys didn't necessarily grow up on the beach, but I think that was probably part of an early part of your life is getting into the ocean. So can you give us a little bit of a picture of where you came from?
Yeah. Our life when we were kids was, it was amazing, really. Like this little town's beautiful. It's a great place to grow up. And, you know, my dad was working, he was doing pipeline construction wherever that work took him, you know? So he would be up and gone. He'd be out of the house at 4 a.m. every day on the weekdays. And my mom was just kind of a homemaker. And we had a pretty simple, kind of normal upbringing, I think. And we were just off to little Catholic schools every day. And just kind of mucking around in the orchards and the foothills of Ojai. And then on the weekends, we would go to the beach every chance that we got. And there was a whole crew of us. There were my brothers and I, and then, you know, a bunch of other friends, my best buddy, Vaughn Montgomery, and Lennons and Mark Brown. We would all go down and we would go directly to the closest beach, which was Emma Wood. And we would just post up at Emma Wood. Like at that time in our lives, my dad surfed. He was actually a really good surfer, but he wasn't like he just would go to the beach and go surfing. He wasn't driving around in circles looking for the best waves. And so he would just take us straight to Emma Wood and we would just post up there. And so we would do that every chance that we got. And being here, it's really hot in the summertime. So getting down to the beach was a huge deal for us. And we'd spend as much time as we could down there. And we'd often, like, one family would rent out the camp spot. And then as soon as that, you know, week was over and you couldn't rent it anymore, the next family would rent it out. It used to be so affordable, you know. And but then when I was 4 years old, my little sister was born, who's severely handicapped. And so that definitely, like, was a little bit of a game changer for our family. You know, she's blind and deaf with cerebral palsy. And so it was a little bit of a hectic existence, you know. But like, I think what that did for us is just had us spending more time outside, you know, more time out around town, more time at the beach, you know. And that you know, really, you know, that was a hard, I didn't really recognize it as being a hard time, but it was a hard time for our family. And it was a huge transition to figure out how to deal with that. You know, it was before the internet. So my parents weren't like, you know, you weren't like, there weren't like support groups, you know, that you could just look up and stuff like that. And so my parents were trying to piece that together. But I think, you know, the way that affected us was that we just spent more time outside. probably didn't do a lot for my book learning to have that come into my life at 4 years old, but but I did. We had everything we needed. My pops was like a go-getter. Always had us, kind of out in a natural environment doing something where we could get in a little bit of trouble and have a good time. And we had an amazing. It was pretty magical place to grow up, between Ojai and down there at Emmawood.
It's a pretty common theme that we talk about quite a lot with very high level surfers, is the ocean becoming, a place of refuge from whatever's going on, even if the situation at home's not bad. It's just, for whatever reason, there's sort of that common theme of people going, man, this is my refuge. And because it has that real like existential benefit to young people that are in those situations, the person ends up spending so much time in the ocean, they end up getting very, very good at whatever they're doing in the ocean. And you could kind of look across the spectrum of whether they're CT surfers or free surfers, and there is that common theme. At the time you're growing up, with you and your brother spending all this time at the beach and starting to surf, Ventura has such a proud history of very, very good surfers, but there's always the caveat that it's like, we're not Orange County, we're removed from that in a way. I'm wondering, you talked about in the first segment, surfing for stickers and becoming obsessed with professional surfing at a young age. How were you first introduced, or was this always something that you and your brothers thought about from the time you started surfing? Where like, those are the best surfers, we get the magazines, whatever kind of contest results or videos we can get our hands on, we digest? Or was there kind of a moment where you're like, oh yeah, no, this makes sense, this is a pathway to something else?
So how did I get introduced to like the possibility
just like
of
the industry and exactly.
Yeah. Well, so like I said, my dad was a really good surfer, but he didn't have videos or magazines around or anything like that. He didn't really like identify as a surfer. He just surfed, and he surfed well, but it wasn't how he would. But I'd say the what really introduced my brothers and I to, and we all might answer this differently, but the way I remember it is that my best friend, Vaughn Montgomery, his dad, Mike Montgomery, he was like a diehard surfer, and he knew everything. He was like an encyclopedia, and he had all the new surf films and all the magazines. And he also, like, when we, got a little bit older, he started throwing us in the car and going to check different surf spots. He would take us down to Oxnard, or he would drive us up to Halama. And, while we were going, he would be telling us, who was doing what in the surfing world at any given time. And I think that was like what opened us up to the larger community of surfers and the history of surfing. And then when, I was like 12 or 13 years old, I started competing. And I think that was really what kind of thrust us into, or me at least, and Keith, we started doing WSAs and NSSAs, mostly NSSAs. And, all of a sudden you find yourself down at lowers, and you're surfing, and there's Nathan Fletcher, and you're like, holy shit, that's Nathan Fletcher right there. And that's Christian Fletcher, and that's Herbie Fletcher. Like, whoa, this is crazy. And like, you have those guys in a heat or whatever. And, so even though like we felt really, really removed, we're just up the road, I know, but we felt really, really removed, but we were close enough to where once we got contact with that, we'd like look at it in the magazines and had no connection to it for a long time, and then started competing, and you'd show up at an event and be like, whoa, we're at lowers. Like, remember Potts in that movie with the webs and trunks at lowers? Like, that's where we are right now. Oh my God, it just seemed like the biggest deal ever. And it was just like a succession of that continuing to happen, and being really enamored by it, being like, I can't believe it. I got to surf lowers. It's the most rippable wave ever, or, when I got a little older, growing up, seeing all that imagery of Curran at Todos, and then going down there and getting to do that and try that. And then when I got older, taking trips to Hawaii, being at Foodland and like shopping and Aki's like shopping for, Lucky Charms next to you and at Foodland. And you're like, oh my God, that's Aki. Like, so it was really an interesting experience to be just so obsessed with surfing, and then continuously having access to like getting to meet your heroes and spend time in these places. And I think that's what kept me going for a really long time, is like I just wanted to, like, there was nothing more that I enjoyed than getting to go surf on a surf trip with one of my heroes, or spend time in Hawaii and get to paddle out and, you're surfing with Peter Cole, or, Clyde Cow or something, like just the craziest. You couldn't imagine that could even happen. And so I think that started, actually, one of the first times I can remember that happening. I guess this was we less knew what was going on, but to remember it back, like we were surfing Emma Wood, and we would, every once in a while, Greeno would show up and paddle out to the reef on a mat and surf the reef. And so those experiences, I think, just stuck with us. And they were a big deal. They were a big deal to us, it kind of meant everything to us. So I think that exposure and that like ladder of getting to do that over and over again with new people and being genuinely like just totally obsessed with this thing just kept me going for a really long time.
It's beautifully put. And I think you touch on something that's really unique and special to surfing, because you're absolutely right. Like when you're a kid and you're, poring over the magazines or rewatching the VHS tape over and over and over, and you're like, man, the stories and these locations and these people, they're like Titanic, and you're kid when you're a kid and you're so impressionable. But as you pointed out, everything in surfing, by and large, is really accessible. Like if you want, you can drive down and you can surf lowers, and it's the site of all this special stuff that you've absorbed. And, you can go to a contest, and like, if you want, you can sit next to Kelly Slater warming up before his, you know what I mean? Like it's, I don't think there's any other sport or activity where you could have the same, like, point A to point B, like very short distance between things that you hold super, super sacred, and just getting to be a part of it if you want to. I think the big key, and I know this is a big thing in your family, and you've talked about it, when your dad's sort of raising you and your brothers up, is you definitely have to be respectful depending on where you go. And it seems like that was a big thing for you and your brothers, whether it was meeting your heroes or going to Hawaii or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think, I always enjoyed that part of the process of like anywhere you show up, you get there and you kind of like look around, and first you're kind of, looking at what the waves are doing and where the current is and where the channel is. And then you're kind of like looking at who's who and trying to guess like which person do you need to look out for. And there's no place on earth that you learn that better than the North Shore, and I kind of thoroughly enjoyed the process because I do respect all those guys so much. And I remember, when I was like 16, I would go over to the North Shore for spring break. And I remember surfing VLAN one time, and something happened where Perry Dane got snaked and he went over the falls, and I just was like duck diving, and he popped up right near me and we kind of bumped into each other. And he kicked me and like 5 other people out of the water at the same time. And I remember I was so shattered, and I told my brother Chris, I'm like, oh, it's over, dude. Perry kicked me out of the water. And he's like, dude, join the club. Like he's doing that every day. He won't even remember. He won't even remember it was you. And but just I value all those experiences so much, and just even getting to. It wasn't like I was a mainstay at Pipeline or anything, but I did surf it a lot and, snuck waves at Backdoor and Off the Wall quite a bit, just to be out in the lineup there and to have a phase in my life where I did know who was who. And the dynamic out there was so incredible and so hectic and intense. And just knowing what the bottom looks like, I did a lot of diving out there. And, it's an amazing experience to spend that much of your time doing something, and between the natural environment of the waves and the characters, the freaking gnarly characters that surf out there, not just the best surfers, but the thugs, is just an incredible thing to learn how natural, dynamic, and I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it was a really amazing time in my life, and I really appreciate that. And to this day, though, like when I go to a new spot, I'm always trying to figure out who's who and who not to snake, who not to call off a wave, even if it feels like your turn. Like there's just people that it's better that you don't call them, even if they're not going to beat you up. It's like, it's nice to not be calling off a guy that, the wrong guy. So I've always enjoyed that. And I think it's part of the reason why I really love body surfing, is because first of all, I just love the act. It's just so much fun. You never have a bad body surf. And second of all, if there's a new lineup that I don't really know, trying to figure out the wave, and maybe it's a little bit of an intense crew, I'll swim out and try to figure it out. Like you're no threat to anybody when you swim out, and it gives you a little time to just like take it all in. And I mean, that's what I do when I go back to Hawaii now, is I pretty much body surf most of the time. It's insane. Like you can paddle out, feels like that ace up your sleeve. Like it's you can paddle out a pipeline and basically be in the barrel with John watching him go by you. It's like getting to sit on the 50-yard line at the Super Bowl, like the craziest thing ever. And so I've always enjoyed the process of learning a lineup, figuring out who's who, and kind of, going with the flow.
You mentioned pipeline there, and it struck me because we were talking about this the other day. I was talking to John Florence about it a while ago, and my kids, they got me into climbing during COVID, and I love it. Mm-hmm. And like digest all the content. Like we're gonna watch The Alpinist or whatever. 14 Peaks, et cetera, and I was watching all this stuff, and I remember I was talking to John at the same time, and I said, honestly, like if I had to, maybe this is a bit ham-fisted of a comparison, but the climbing community at El Capitan and then the surfing community at Pipeline, it feels like there's a ton of overlap in those stories, because it's like this very sacred, specific area with this group of people, some of whom make their entire career out of just focusing on this face of rock or this particular wave. And I know you've got a bit of background with the climbing community as well. Like, do you think that's fair? Like in the sense of just when you're talking about that environment at Pipeline and, the characters that are there and how important it is to certain people's careers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that whole, what we did at Patagonia, I think, Jeff Johnson and my brother Chris wrote this like little manifesto that was built almost completely off of what you just said, but more based on the climbers in the 50s and 60s, the climbers and the surfers, kind of, right, what was going on at El Capitan and what was going on, or Yosemite in general, and what was going on the North Shore with Waimea Bay and Sunset Beach and everything. I mean, it's the comparison. I mean, it was almost exactly the same people doing the exact same thing, developing all their own gear. Nobody was making a living. Right. You had to spend, all of your time doing that. And I think it's an exact comparison. I think that they were born out of the exact same need to get away from normal society and kind of forge their own way into something. And so I see an exact, correlation between those two crews. Like, modern climbing and modern surfing, I do think we're born out of the exact same time period for the exact same reasons.
That's really interesting. On the topic of making a living and going back to your own trajectory as a professional surfer, you mentioned, Bob Hurley and Paul Gomez and getting the support you needed, Billabong, Hurley, and then transitioning to Patagonia and beyond. for you when you're coming up, if you listen to your brothers or read about your brothers, there's always this common theme when they're talking about you. They go, Dan is way too humble for his own good. He will never ever talk about like how good he is at whatever he's doing. And it was interesting because a lot of times they hearken it back to kind of what you said, where it's like, you were the younger brother, so you were kind of tagging along, or you were a few years younger than that momentum generation, so it felt like you were maybe tagging along. But when you looked at your own career at that time, were you thinking, yeah, I'm going to make the tour, or I'm going after a world title, or I want to achieve this? Or were you more taking it kind of day by day?
I mean, I had high hopes when I was a kid, like there was a time when I was like, oh, I want to try to win a world title. But then I also think I had a little bit of imposter syndrome too. Like I would like, it was an interesting experience to be in, because I would like get a huge result and I'd be like, man, I don't feel like I was surfing very well. And like, I feel like I kind of got juiced in that event or something. Like I would be thinking those type of thoughts. And I was around surfers who like, they wouldn't care how they won. If they won, they were like king of the world. And
right.
So I definitely had a difference in my temperament there. And I was, I would say that like, I was a little bit, competitively a little bit conflicted. I didn't believe the construct of competition as much as, I got to be around some of the greatest competitors in history, like, I mean, I wasn't around Kelly a lot competing, but I got to hang with him a ton. And then I competed with Andy coming up, and I watched his whole trajectory from the front row, and to witness
right.
that sense of belief and like kind of, that level of commitment was really, really interesting to see it up close and personal, there was a big difference between, myself and people like Kelly and Andy, as far as, the belief in what they were doing competitively. And I kind of noticed that after a few years. And I don't know, I don't know what to say about that other than that, like, try coming up under Kelly and Shane, like it's hard to live up to those guys, like those are the guys that were just right above, Kalani and Timmy Curran and myself, we were kind of little crew and Andy, but like, it's hard to pat yourself on the back when you're coming up under, Shane Dorian and Kelly Slater. Like, they're still doing crazy shit all the time. And just, and it was another thing with the, kind of learning from, I think, Todd Chesser and having those guys. There was a lot of like hazing that kept you in your place. But I don't know, there was times too when I just like didn't always, I think, one of my greatest achievements, a couple of my greatest achievements I was an alternate to the YETI, and I was an alternate to the I was invited to be an alternate in the YETI and in the Mavericks event. And I can remember being like, I don't know if I deserve this. I've just always had that. And I don't know why. I don't think it's a good thing. I kind of battle against it a little bit, but it's just been a part of my personality. And sometimes when I should take something and run with it, I'll like kind of move almost the other way. And I think that's what I've done a little bit at times. I'm like, I can't explain that exactly.
Well, I mean, sometimes it works out really well because number one, it's impressive that you'd have that kind of internal honesty and a self-assessment at a young age to be like, I have the drive, I got the motivation, but also, I'm looking at some comparisons and I'm recognizing that's not me necessarily. And, fortunately for all of us, because I'm just a couple of years younger than you and you get to speak to one of my favorite surfers on the podcast. Fantastic. But, you were able to commit more time to free surfing and, collaborating with Taylor Steele, whether it was in the show or a number of other films, but then also with Thomas Campbell, both, I think, in front of and behind the lens to a degree. Can you talk to us a little bit about just the free surfing part and the filming part of your career? And then with it comes to Taylor and Thomas, I'm sure there are some similarities, but stylistically, it does feel like they're producing pretty distinct products in a way. And so maybe talk a little bit about working with both of them too.
Well, so working with, they're super different, both Thomas and Taylor, but they both had this really incredibly high standard of what they were looking for. And I loved working with Taylor. And that was happening when I was working with Taylor, that was happening kind of while I was competing. But when there was breaks and events, you would be, going on trips with Taylor. And, it was really lucky to be a part of that crew. That was a lucky thing. But then when it came to getting usable waves, I loved that it was just like, he didn't care who you were once you were on the trips. If the wave wasn't good enough, you wouldn't use it. Like if it wasn't predetermined that you were going to get a section, like if you got a bunch of bad boards or had an injury or whatever, like you weren't going to be in the movie. And that's just the way it was. And I kind of loved that. It was just very clear. And what I really loved too about working with Taylor is like you had to surf the best you'd ever surfed to be a part of his projects. And that was just like the perfect standard. You were just like the contest, you just felt like there was so much, you just had to, you were just doing the dance so often, surfing terrible waves. Back then it was 3 waves. Right. Like I've never surfed in an event where it was 2 waves. And you were just like, doing windshield wipers to the beach. And it just was, it was just maddening because you're like, let's do the thing. Let's do the, let's do the thing where we try to surf the best we've ever surfed, And so that's what you got to do when you were with Taylor. You were surrounded by people who were better than you. And you were trying to surf the best you've ever surfed in your life. And every once in a while you would achieve that. And so that was really, really fun time to get to work on those films. And it was also like super challenging, It wasn't just like a free for all. You were like, if you weren't surfing well, you're super pissed off, or if you had a bad batch of boards or whatever it was, like you were trying to surf the best you've ever surfed. And if you weren't surfing that way or, you were bummed. So it was like pretty high level, like you were working really hard at it. And so I got lucky enough while I was working with Taylor to have a couple of good, years where I was able to put together sections and I feel really lucky that happened. It was between time and space and being part of that generation and part of that crew and then having good enough boards and amazing surf on the trips. Like that's a really lucky thing to happen in your career at that time. It was a huge deal. So I feel really lucky about that. And then, so I was competing during that time. And then what happened is, what really gave me a chance to like take a step back and look at my competitive career was that I was surfing Himalayas one day and I blew my shoulder out really bad. And that was one of those, that was before Himalayas. It was a photographed spot. And it was at that time, it was just always a few friends, nobody around. It was totally taboo to take a camera out there or anything. And I just ate shit and blew my shoulder out really bad. And needed to have the labor and repair surgery. So I was out for 7 months. And it was right after I got that second to Sunny at the US Open. And so that year I got the best seed I had ever gotten. And so I was like all set up to qualify the next year. And I was out. I was done. So I had that whole next year basically to kind of step back and look at. And I think I was like 27 or 28 and I was feeling like really old at the time. And so that was when I got to take a step back. And I think I finished off that year, did a couple of events. I think that's when I won the Faith Riding Pro contest. But I just felt like I'd had enough contact with the people who were really doing well in competition. And I'd had enough time to kind of look at myself and know what I was good at to realize that like, if I could still continue, surfing, that if competition wasn't a part of it, that would be better off for me. So right around that time, that was right around when the shift from Hurley to Patagonia was going on. And that's right around when I started working with Thomas Campbell. And I remember I went to Thomas and I'd seen his first movie, The Seedling. And I was, pretty interested in filmmaking. And the way I remember it was being like, hey, I'd be stoked to help you work on a film, even if it's just behind the camera. And then, a couple months later, he called and was like, let's go to Sri Lanka. And it's not so much that I was like helping him make the film, but in those days it was like, there's no crew. It's like Thomas with a bunch of, cans of film and a few cameras and tripods and a couple surfers. And so you're just inevitably helping make the film. You're carrying tripods and helping set stuff up and doing all that stuff and then surfing your brains out too. And that was totally different because with Taylor and a few other of the guys filming, they would not miss waves. Like it was you would go out surfing and they'd get every single wave. Where Thomas would miss like 50% of the waves. It wasn't about getting every wave. It was about a totally different thing. So that took me a little while to get used to. But it was just an incredibly different creative process. Super interesting. Thomas is, amazing artist, super creative. And it was really fun to see a different process. And we would go on trips and just, for weeks at a time to Morocco and Sri Lanka and Mexico and just an entirely different MO on those trips. And when I look back at those ones too, I'm like, I just feel so lucky that they got documented and met an entirely different group of people. And it was amazing.
It's cool to hear you talk about those two distinct approaches to filmmaking. And I mean, again, like a couple of years younger than you, but like getting to watch all these films and getting to watch all those segments at a time that was a little bit pre-information age, certainly pre-social media. And like, like in a Taylor film, like someone's segment, regardless of where it landed in the film, it's almost like an art gallery showing where it's like, oh, this is what this person's been working on. Like this is this collection of expression that this person's been working on for a period of time, and now we get to enjoy it. And it, like, all those sections, all your sections and the songs and the waves are like seared into my brain in a way where you flash forward to 2023, it's like probably every half session gets thrown up on YouTube or like on Instagram or whatever, and you're constantly feeding this thing, and it's hard to remember anything when that's the case. And it does feel like some of the free surfers in 2023, whether it's, Noah Dean or a few others, are moving to that space where they're like, no, we're not releasing everything on social media. We want to put together, something a little more substantive. Is that how you kind of remember it too? Or maybe I'm off?
I mean, absolutely. It was, the social media world is a blessing and a curse. But I mean, I've seen this stuff where a kid like drops a clip or whatever you call it, and it's the most amazing surfing I've ever seen. And he did all of it in 2 sessions or something crazy.
Right. Yeah.
And then like it's forgotten in a month. And like back then, but I do think it opens the door to more people, like back in the day, it was like you had to know the filmmaker, and you had to have, the budget from the company you're working with to put these parts together. And I think, social media opens it to more people, but it also makes each part and each thing less significant. And it seems like, it's, just the landscape of media these days is just baffling in general, whether it's the news or surf media or whatever. It's like everybody's consuming different things, and it's really hard to keep up with, and a little bit, it's fun at times, but it's also maddening. And I think the kids these days seem like they have to work 1,000,000 times harder because it's just never ending. The thing's just a never ending void of it's just a vacuum for material, And so I think that it's just completely changed,
Yeah.
And I don't know how the kids do it these days.
Well, and I mean, I like as an observer too, it does feel like this is something you've done really well in your own career, which is try to protect space and time and energy away from that kind of current model that we've been talking about, probably mostly for your own sanity. But I do think that even like unrelated, but I think in my life too, like anytime I have a little bit of space and a little bit of time and I'm able to pour energy into something, the output is so much more profound than it would be otherwise, where I'm like, I just tick that off my 20 things to do today. And it does feel like you've maybe even actively curated that kind of space in your own career. Is that fair?
Are you saying as far as like the kind of social media type of stuff?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. It just like as a fan and as an outside observer, it feels like you've been really deliberate, whether it's been your sponsorship choices or the projects you choose to work on, or again, yeah, I think social media is a part of it. Just how much you choose to engage in that seems pretty deliberate to like protect space, in your life for your own kind of benefit.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's been largely to do that I've been really, really lucky to work with, people and companies and all this stuff that I really am, interested in. And yeah, I mean, I kind of going back to that little bit of like how I can feel that imposter syndrome a little bit. Like if there's something I'm not interested in, it's really hard to stay tuned in. So I say no a lot more than I say yes. And I also just feel like, I only have so much energy to put into things, and I want to be able to put everything into something. I also got a kid and a family, and, it just doesn't, some people kind of like are just constantly working on output of media and stuff. And that's just not where I've been. It's like I've been really lucky to work with a handful of filmmakers and companies, and and so it's made me a little spoiled. My standards a little high, and so I kind of waiting around to work on the projects that are really inspiring.
I like it. We're going to take one more break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right, we are back. This is The Lineup. I'm Dave Prodan, speaking with Dan Malloy. Dan, you've given us so much insight into your background and where you've been and what you've been working on. And the work that you're doing right now with your family at Poco Farm is so cool. And you mentioned, you've got a young family, outside of Poco Farm. And are there any projects that are taking up time for you at the moment, or that you're looking forward to 24, or anything that you're even kind of incubating idea wise of what might be next for you outside of the farm life?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're definitely focusing on this educational farm project, and that's taking up most of my time. But as far as surfing goes, there are definitely a couple of things coming up. I'm hoping to go do a trip to Mexico with Trevor Gordon before too long. You know Trevor at all?
I know of him. Yeah, big fan.
He's great. Really good surfer, and he's been shaping a bunch. And we were just talking. He invited me to go on a trip possibly in spring, and just take a couple board bags full of the boards that he's been shaping. That would be super exciting. The guys at Need Essentials have been in touch a little bit. I don't work formally with them or anything, but they've been like, hey, let's do a trip. Let's do a strike mission somewhere. So I'm looking forward to possibly doing that with that crew. I'm looking forward to working with the guys at True Aims in the future, possibly working on a little film for them one day, a little like origin story. They've been doing amazing work up there for years, just head down doing the work. We have my brothers and I and Jeff Johnson. We all own an outrigger, and that's just getting done, being painted and gel coated and everything at Jeff Hull's boatyard right now. That should be done and ready to go like right around my birthday, which is coming up in December. And so hoping to get that back out to the overhead, Emwood Reef. Just kind of chipping away. Hopefully do some diving again soon too. It's not really like prime time this time of year right now, but hopefully get on another trip or dive out at the islands a little before too long. So yeah, just kind of chipping away. Nothing huge, but plenty of fun stuff in the pipeline.
Love it. We put out a feeler for some questions on Instagram at the Lineup Pod, and we got a ton back you. Actually, I think people are like, "Oh my God, it's a little bit like it's sponsored by YETI. We can use YETI. I was gonna say Sasquatch, but it's like a little bit like a YETI sighting. Like, oh my God, like he's emerged. Let's anyway. We've whittled it down to 3 questions for you. First question is from Hermes Pineda, who asks, was 8 the best surf movie you've ever been to?
Like, was working on it the best? I mean, it was it was fun. We had a good time. I would say it was 8 days. So like that was a blip. It was like, I can't even believe I'd forgotten about it, to be honest. It was a super good time. Was hanging out with that whole crew, surfing our brains out. Doesn't stand out as anything better than the other trips I've been on, but it was a good time for sure. That was between, we were in Foster, between events, and we would always stay there. And it was back then when like you would make enough money at the events to rent a house. Like we'd all be renting a house, just surfing every day. It's unbelievable. And before 9/11 and before all the crazy shit that's going on in the world. And it was definitely an amazing time. But we did that every year, and that time we filmed it and they pumped out a little video.
That's cool. I like how you say it was back when we made enough money to rent a house, but I feel like people are making more money now contest wise, but renting a house has gone like through the roof. So it's like tough to make that work.
I guess I said that because like the last time I went to Australia, the dollar was not very strong. I don't know what's like right now.
No, of course. Yeah.
But like, I remember traveling to South Africa and to Oz and to everywhere basically, and just being like, just feeling like kings. You know, you'd make $1,000 at a contest and you were just like laughing, you know? And so it was just a different time for sure.
Second question is from Curse Bailey, who asks, have you ever thought about making a snowboard movie like your cousins? Hopefully that's accurate.
So my cousins Brendan and Emmett made a like a scripted comedy
interesting
snowboard movie. Yeah. And I think it was one of Zach Galifianakis's first movies. But no, that's a simple one. That's a very simple answer. No, I haven't thought about making a
not interested
or anything like that. No, not interested.
What about any movie like scripted or fiction? That's not your jam.
Thinking about making it. I think that for me, it's so funny. I mean, it's so not interesting to anybody on this podcast, I'm sure, but I am interested in making films, like kind of documentary type of films in agriculture. Cool. I just feel like agriculture is this like kind of big forgotten cornerstone in kind of environmental movement, and I think it's just this really great connector. Like when you really get deep down enough into whether it's hunting or agriculture, like there's this kind of radical center politically and everything that I don't think it's just endlessly fascinating to me the way that people are farming and hunting and raising animals and doing all this stuff. I don't know why it's super interesting to me. I'm not necessarily gifted at any of that stuff, but it's super interesting to me. And almost like it was in surfing back in the day, it's like really fun to be around these characters, gotten to be around some of these different people, and that are doing amazing work. And it's just, I have that same feeling like I used to have when I would see Aki shopping at Foodland. I'm like, wow, that's that person there doing this amazing work. And it would be fun to do some documentary work in that space. But I'm not champing at the bit quite yet. Like I'm holding back a little bit right now, just trying to focus on our project for the time being. We'll probably make a couple little mini film projects about what we're doing here first.
Very cool. Last question from the Instagram community is from @NorbelR, who asks, what are 2 to 3 surf spots in your pocket list? Bucket list? I've never heard pocket list before. Maybe bucket list.
Let's see. I mean, I still head down to Emelwood quite a bit. It's funny because it's like a pretty, realistically, it's a super mediocre wave, but it's right the closest spot, and it has those fun little wedges that come off the reef from the outside. And it's also fun because you go there and Dane's there, just shredding. And the other day I went there and it was Chippa Wilson and Bobby Martinez and Aton, and then always a bunch of my best friends are there. So I'll head down there when I can. I don't know. Most of the spots that are the ones I really dream about aren't really spots that I can talk about. But
that's a great answer.
that's I think the answer. And it's not like some of them, it's interesting to me what we were talking about earlier with the lineup, like who's, dealing with the different characters and everything. Some of them aren't even really secrets. Mm-hmm. They're just like, you don't bring cameras, and you don't bring a bunch of people. You just show up and surf. And I love that. It's really cool to have those kind of unwritten little standards and to stick with them.
I like it. Well, thanks to everyone who wrote in at the lineup pod. We're now down to our final segment. This is the lightning round. So these are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can. First question. If you could only have one board set up for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
Oh, lightning? Son of a I think it would be oh my God, one board?
One board.
Oh God. My flippers.
Okay, I like it. We're not going to hold you to it, but that's a good. I like the audible. Second question: coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Burrito or pizza?
Right now, neither one.
Interesting. Last book you read?
Last book I read, oh God, a book called, the last book I read, can't even think. I just read a book recently called Landmarks. Kind of obscure and random, but it's a really good one. It's a good listen to. Both reading it and listening to it are great.
Best surf film ever?
Oh, scheiße. Crystal Voyager.
What is one wave you never have to go back to?
Sorry.
Oh,
I'm going to just take it back.
No, go for it.
I'm going to say that one of my favorite surf films ever, it's hard to say best, but is Litmus.
Oh, that's a good choice too. You got 2 bites of that apple. That's fine. Both
I'm going to take 2 bites.
That's good. What is one wave you never have to go back to?
One wave I never have to go. I'm thinking of a really scary left, but I can't think of it. Oh, God, I'm not good at lightning.
You're doing good. You're doing really good. Don't worry about
one
it.
of those, one of the, we used to have to go every year to surf in Argentina for a giant like reef event, and it was always ankle high. And so I'd be glad to go back to Argentina for a couple of different things, but not for surfing.
Fair. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life, and you can dreamcast it, perfect conditions, just your buddies, no one out, whatever.
I think, I mean, I wouldn't mind surfing lances with nobody around every day, but sandbars are also good. I got to surf King Island. That was pretty amazing. I love little close to the beach. Beach breaks are really fun too. So I'm taking multiple bites out of every apple.
Those are both good answers. Best person to share a lineup with?
My friends from home.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Oh man, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of people that are bad to share a lineup with. Oh my God. I don't know.
You don't have to name it. Not everyone wants to name on this one. That's okay.
No, I mean,
if
there's
they
a bunch
exist,
of people
that's more
I can
than
name,
enough.
Yeah. I can't even think. There's just too many to name.
Right. Fair. All right. This is the last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by
going for a hard run.
I like it. Dan Malloy, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. Congratulations on everything you're doing at Poco Farm. And yeah, man, you've been a hero of mine for a long time. So stoked to get to talk to you, and hope we get to hang out soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate it.